Okay, so the inquest of Jason Hennessy, the father of 7 who was shot in Blanchardstown on Christmas Eve, opened, closed very quickly, as these inquests tend to when there's, charges pending before the courts. But it was pretty dramatic, and the family certainly showed certainly their feelings during it. I think Mr. Hennessy's wife made a remark to the Gardaí that it was the guards' fault that he was in the grave, that they didn't want the media in attendance at the inquest, which of course is it's a public event.
I mean, these inquests of people that have suffered that sort of violent death, they tend to open and then they're adjourned basically because of criminal proceedings. Obviously, Jason Hennessy Snr's death was an extremely high-profile event. He was in Browns Steakhouse in Blanchardstown on Christmas Eve, having a meal with a number of people, when a gunman came in and fired shots at him. That gunman was a guy called Tristan Sherry. He subsequently died as a result of a fatal assault in the restaurant. And it was certainly one of those stories that just generated a huge amount of publicity.
Now, the details about what happened they weren't read out under the course of this inquest.
Because it's very standard. You see it all the time. This can go on for years, where the guards will keep coming back to court. The inquests are scheduled as if the same as anything.
Yeah.
And the guards will come back and say, there's still criminal proceedings, we're still hoping to bring charges, or whatever the case may be. And in that case, it gets put back to a further date. And this can literally go on for a decade. I mean, even cases like Eddie Hutch's inquest still hasn't been held, still hasn't been heard. And we've heard some details sometimes about the hopes, for example, that Daniel Kinahan could be charged. So all that we heard were really the details of how he died.
Around his actual death, and the fact that it was his daughter, Shelby Maher. She had to give evidence about formally identifying her father's body in the hospital 11 days after the shooting. Is that right?
Yeah, because he was shot dead, or he was shot. He suffered, very, very serious injuries, but he remained alive until the 4th of January. Certainly initially there was a belief that he would die that evening, but he seems to have rallied to an extent and only passed away on the 4th of January. They described what he died of. The coroner heard that he died of gunshot wounds to the neck and the upper trunk. So he certainly suffered a very serious wound to his neck as a result of the shots. And so that's really all we heard. We didn't hear, any of the circumstances before or after it, or any of the, any witness statements, because an inquest, you typically hear witness statements, and obviously.
And a lengthy adjournment there, which will sort of tally with, I suppose, how long it's expected for these cases to go through the court relating to this killing. And the coroner granted the application only for mention again on April the 8th, 2025. So
I mean, you wouldn't want to, it just won't. It just almost inevitably won't happen then.
No, it will only really happen after everything legally is completed. Now, the coroner was Claire Keane, and she expressed her sympathy to a large group of relatives who attended this inquest, and in particular to Mr. Hennessy's wife, Veronica, who sort of spoke very vocally in the aftermath of the short hearing.
Yeah, and she said, the coroner said it was a very, very difficult time for the family. And in the aftermath of the hearing, while still in the court, a member of the guards sort of approached the family, maybe to talk to them about, what was likely to come next. And that guard was told by Jason Hennessy's wife, "You are the reason my husband is in the ground." And then what is described as, they questioned the right of the media. Some of the family questioned the right of the media to be there and report on these things. Obviously, a coroner's court is the same as any other court in Ireland. It's part of the court service, and one of the kind of fundamental rights of how Irish courts operate, and in British and American courts, for example, as well, is that all court sittings are open to the public. and that they're free to be reported on by the media, and they have privilege on that reporting. So as long as you can't be sued for what you report on, as long as it's taken down correctly, basically. Now, sometimes you can see, certainly in this case, families find that hard to accept. They would think, or they would believe, they have a right to privacy when they hear, and admittedly do hear, extremely personal details of their life. However, it's very much written into Irish law that is the way justice is conducted in this country. And not only in this country, there are other countries obviously that have more restrictions, but there is no privacy in a coroner's court, and people can find that very difficult, certainly in cases involving suicide, for example. That can be a very fraught experience. I think Jason Hennessy Snr, he was a person without a lot of criminal convictions. However,
he was facing charges, I think, at the time of his death.
He was facing charges, money laundering, but you're talking, like in the scale of things, relatively small amounts of money. However, despite the fact he's not had many convictions, he is routinely regarded as being a member of a very serious criminal organisation involved in the drugs trade in that part of West Dublin. Now, the family will have a different perspective. In some ways, Jason Hennessy Snr, they've gotten kind of old school treatment, I suppose, in how he's been reported on, in terms of, because of the gang in which he is associated with. That gang have been associated with very serious drug intimidation, I suppose, and a serious level of violence. And that maybe the family feel that is an unfair link to make. However, that is a link that has been made and is backed up by some of the levels of violence we've seen. Only last week in the Irish Independent and in the Sunday World, our colleague Ken Foy was reporting on how a member of the gang associated with Jason Hennessy Snr had put out a bounty really on the head of a guy described as being a drug addict who had been saying bad things about Jason Hennessy Snr and had owed a drugs debt, and he had offered to pay a couple of thousand for anybody who would slash him open, basically. So this is the sort of violence that's being associated.
There's still an awful lot of kind of feuding going on around all this, and a lot of tensions. In relation to these incidents, 4 men have been charged in relation to the murder of Tristan Sherry, and they're all young. Noah Massaney is 18 from Blanchardstown. He was a Leaving Cert student at the time of the fatal incident. David Amma is 18 and he's from Portrain Road. Donna Bate, Michael Andracut, 22 from Blanchardstown, and Wayne Deegan, who's 26 of Fibbletown. And another youth and 4 other males are also facing a series of charges arising out of the same incident, including assault, violent disorder, production of a weapon during the incident. And they include Mr. Hennessy's son, Brandon, who is 20 years of age and from Sheephill Avenue in Blanchardstown. He's charged with violent disorder and producing an item capable of inflicting serious injury. And Juarez Kumbu of Blanchardstown is accused of possession of a submachine gun after he allegedly took the weapon used by the deceased out of the restaurant. And finally, Jonas Kabango, who's 18, also from Blanchardstown, is charged with violent disorder at the same location. I mean, we've remarked before, now all of these, by the way, are due before the Special Criminal Court. And we've remarked before, the youth, the age, they are probably the youngest that we have seen before the Special Criminal Court, certainly in gangland-related charges. Their trials will go ahead, I imagine, next year.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously been huge waits at times into Special Criminal Court, so there can be scheduling issues. But I think the aim will be next year.
But in the meantime, the tensions there don't seem to be abating at all. And of course, while we're only still in, it's October now, is it? Or September?
It is,
yeah, sorry, the months are going past me. Well, we're only still in October. Obviously, tensions do tend to rise around anniversaries, and, it's coming up to that Christmas Eve again time of year in a couple of months' time. So, that's going to be a very tense time as well.
I mean, there's been a heavy policing operation to stop an outbreak of further violence connected with Jason Hennessy Snr's death. There have been some very, very serious incidents, including an attempted hit on a man closely linked to Mr. Hennessy. So it really has been ongoing. The violence around it has been very similar to what we saw in Drogheda, which have been a lot of arson attacks, a lot of people that are solely related to people involved in this feud have also been targeted. It's very sinister. It doesn't all get reported on. And certainly with Drogheda, if you remember that there was a lot of those types of attacks before there was any fatalities. And so obviously the guards have done a particularly good job. They seem to have a good handle on who's involved. But it only takes one time for this to kick off to another level again. It is a very serious and ongoing situation.
OK, and we will follow that closely, so thanks, Niall. I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.